Welcome to the For Everyday Leaders podcast. Brandon Faust, Alex Holt here with you today. Alex, tell us what this podcast is all about, buddy.
Yeah, this podcast is all about helping people lead in the everyday spaces and moments of life. And today we have with us on the show Ryan Bramlett. Ryan is the West Campus pastor and teaching pastor at Traders Point Christian Church. He is the co-host of the Shift the Gravity podcast. He's the husband to Steph. He's the dad at the time of this recording of soon to be 4 kiddos. Almost number 4 is here. And fun fact about Ryan, he once drove his car into a Blockbuster store. And we're just going to leave it at that.
Yeah, I mean, secretly worked for Netflix for a while to destroy, single-handedly destroy.
I took him down.
One Blockbuster down at a time.
Yeah. So proud of you.
That's great. And before we get into this conversation with Ryan, I want you to know that this episode of the For Everyday Leaders podcast is sponsored by Ascend Roofing. The team at Ascend are a perfect sponsor for this podcast as they embody everyday leadership in their business. They're locally owned and operated, and Ascend Roofing has more than a decade of residential roofing experience, and they service the greater Indianapolis area. I've personally had Ascend Roofing come out to my house, and they went above and beyond my expectations. So whether it's to respond to severe weather or just time for a new roof, visit their website at ascendroofingllc.com. Ryan,
Yes.
Thank you for hanging out with us. Welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for inviting me, man.
I think we were talking a little bit before, probably, 7, 8, 9, years ago.
Yeah.
We shook hands, said hello. That was about it. And but I've appreciated from a distance just your leadership, your authenticity, your teaching, and obviously people like Alex and others around Traders Point in the community speak very highly of you. So thanks for hanging out with us today. And I know you and Alex work together regularly.
Yes.
In truth, what was your first impression of Alex? Was he like OG hipster or just wannabe? Let's get it started the right way.
No, the first, I'm thinking back now, I believe it was a coffee we had.
Was it coffee or was it Blaze Pizza? That's what I remember first. There in Whitestown.
You might be right. Yeah, so Blaze Pizza. But honestly, I think, and it's the first thing most people remember about you, is the gnarly voice of just meeting this guy, and then his mouth opens up, and you're like, whoa.
Have you
been smoking your whole life, or how did you get to this spot?
Just since I was 9.
Okay.
Yes.
That's where it started.
I cannot tell you how many events that we've done together in the past, and people are like, is he ill?
Yeah.
Is he all right? I'm like, no. He just has this good Hebraic guttural kind of sound that's naturally built into his voice.
And when he gets going, it's a beautiful.
You're too kind.
Yeah. But no, honestly, the people we're talking about, you got to meet this guy. He's young, but he's unbelievably talented. Haven't seen anything that he can't do. And so that's still true today. So
still young.
Yeah, still young. That's
still feel it. That's all I've kept.
Still young. Well, Ryan, we want to kind of go on a journey, hear more of your story. Tell us about where you grew up. What was life like for little Ryan Bramlett growing up?
Yeah. Hilarious because that was my nickname growing up, was Little Ryan.
I didn't know.
Wow. You guys really did your research here.
We did. Dug deep.
But no, grew up here in Indianapolis on the west side. Born and raised, never left. So I have literally lived within 15 to 20 minutes of the hospital I was born in my whole life. But grew up pretty regular, average, Midwest life. One brother, did my best to make it through, and messed up, more than I'd like to admit, but found my way through, and went through Wayne Township. So Ben Davis graduate for those local. And man, didn't grow up with any, I grew up with parents that loved me, but with no kind of like faith background or no kind of affiliation to anything in those worlds. It was really just kind of, hey, you get up, you give it 110%. Most of the, kind of men in my life, you're thinking, factory workers, my dad's a plumber. So just that idea of you break your back, you do whatever you have to provide for your family. So that was my mindset of, that's who I was going to be. But I was the first of this generation of my family to be able to work with their mind and not their back. Like that was my dad's always his biggest thing of like, I want you to be able to work with your mind and not your back. So that was the goal. And so graduated, went to college, and IUPY for my first year, and then IU Bloomington for my sophomore year. And like I said, first person in my family to go to college. We didn't understand how college worked, mostly the student loan situation.
Yeah.
And so freshman year, my uncle co-signs for me for my student loans. It works. I go. Sophomore year, some things have happened financially. He's no longer able to co-sign for me. So we're talking to IU, and they're like, it's fine. It happened. We'll work it out. I'm like, okay, sounds good.
Trust you.
And I go down there, and we fill out something else, and we wait a couple weeks and get a letter back says denied. So I was like, okay. But no one's worried. They're like, it's fine. Just here, fill out this and do this. I'm like, okay. And I fill it out and denied. And they're like, okay, well, one more thing. And we do it. And then finally the next thing I get is a letter in my little mailbox in my dorm saying, please have all your stuff out by December 16th. Cause you haven't given us any money for tuition. So I was like, that's a bummer. And I remember packing up my Grand Am, coming back home in the winter, and moving back into my house, back into the bedroom I grew up in, and couldn't go anywhere because obviously until I could pay back IU the 10 G's that I owed him, it was like, what do you do? And that whole mindset that I had of you just work really hard. If you do the right thing, you can do whatever you want to do. And this was the first time in my life where that wasn't true. I couldn't do what I wanted to do, and I didn't know how to do what was next. So I just went back to doing what I always did. I got 2 jobs and started working from, 6 in the morning until 10 at night. I'd work Burger King in the mornings and then Indy Parks in the afternoon into the evening, and just slowly made my way through it.
So that's I think what's so great about that part of the story, which I'm sure is not super fun at times.
Zero fun.
Zero fun. But like, that's real life.
Yeah.
Like that is, and I think a lot of times we have probably more agency than we think we do, but then there's certain circumstances, a situation where you're like, I don't know what to do. Yeah. And so I think obviously that ethic that was put into you from your family helped you really, plow through that season, if you will. How does it go from that part of the story to like, hey, you're this teaching pastor at a very large influential church? Like what happened in the midst of all of that? How did that get there? What was orchestrated?
For sure.
Yeah. What's the story there?
So I'm back home working these couple jobs, still hanging out with the people that I grew up with, and hanging out one night, and a friend of mine was like, hey, him and his girlfriend were like, we there's a friend of mine, I think you guys would be great. Would love to set you up on a blind date. And I was like, well, never been on a blind date, not too excited about it. And then I just start really just being insecure about myself. Like, does she know that, I'm out of college, that I'm working 2 dead-end jobs? They were like, no, but I don't think you need to lead with that either. Maybe just see where it goes. And I was like, that's fair. And so we go out, a big group of us go bowling, hang out, and she was incredible. She was different than anyone I'd ever met in my whole life. And so at the end of the night, I nervously asked if she would like to go on a real date, just me and her. And she said yes, and we went out to dinner and a movie, and it was amazing. And I'm dropping her off, and she was like, hey, this is a Friday night. She said, do you want to go to church with me on Sunday? And I said, hey, no, I don't want to go to church with you on Sunday. And this was my answer. I was like, I'm a good person, but church really just isn't my thing. And she just like stopped. She was sitting there in the passenger seat, and she looked at me, and she was like, I don't go to church to be a good person, really. I go to church because of Jesus. And then went on for the next few minutes to tell me about who Jesus was, the Son of God, the whole thing, that he came here, died for me, resurrected. And I'm just like sitting here trying to piece this thing together. And at the same time, it was wild, but it's like I knew it was true. It's like when she said it, I was like, man, if there is a God, I think that's exactly what God would be like. Yeah. That there would be a father that would love me so much that he would be willing to give his only son, because I knew the only thing that I could compare it to was like my dad. And I knew my dad loved me more than the world and would die for me without hesitation. But would he be willing to sacrifice me? No. Like that's a whole nother love for so many people. And I couldn't wrap my head around it in the moment. And I was like, all right. And I changed my mind. And I said, yes, I'll go to church with you. And the church I went to was Traders Point on the northwest side. And I went on Sunday, and I never stopped coming. And 6 months later, I got baptized. 6 months after that, I got engaged to the woman who shared the gospel with me, which was a great move on my part.
You married away.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
No way around it. And then we got married shortly after that, and then finally, I've paid back the 10,000 only after a few short, hard years. And I'm looking at school again and trying to decide. And any education that I went into in the first part was really this idea of how can I make the most amount of money possible? Looking at the people in my life, looking at the problems I saw, in my kind of naive thinking, it was, well, people would be so much happier if they just had more money. So I'll just get a job that makes a bunch of money. But once I met Jesus, and once I just couldn't get that out of my head, even though after I went back to IUPUI and I was just taking a few classes, and I was like, I got to know more about Jesus. Like, I've missed 21 years of this. I feel like I believe, but I need to know why I believe. I want to study the Bible and see what this is. And so started asking around, and the guys that I worked with at the time, or that I, was in relationship with, that worked at the church, they all went to Cincinnati Christian University, RIP.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have many a friend who are like, so transcripts can't really get them now.
Yeah. Right.
So it's great, but
lots of amazing people that were at that university that came from that. Yes. So,
but I ended up reaching out, and they had a satellite program, an adult program here on the southeast side at the Creek Church.
I remember that.
Yeah. And so I reached out to them. They had two programs. They had a business program and they had a ministry program. And I was like, man, but both of them had like kind of the religious studies where you could get. So I was like, I'll do the business program. Yeah. That way I can get Jesus. I can get the business stuff. Maybe I'll go get my MBA. It'll all work out. Fill out everything. And maybe this is the first sign of CCU. At the time I was seeing it as a sign from God, but they called back and were like, hey man, love everything, but we're actually dropping the business program. All we have is the ministry program. Are you still interested? And I was like, I guess. So I go into that, and I'm there for, the program is about 2 years. And then right before I'm about to graduate, and I'm still not thinking I'm going to use this degree to work in a church, to be in ministry. The thing that stuck out to me the most when I was in that program was counseling. That was actually the thing that I kind of hit it off with, that I enjoyed. I'm a very introverted, quiet person. Being able to sit across from someone, I really enjoyed it. I was like, well, maybe I'll have a practice. Maybe I can do something like that. And then I'm about to graduate. I'm serving in the church, though, in youth ministry at Traders Point. And at this time, I'm working at Forum Credit Union in my little cubicle. And I get a text message from P.D. Kinder, who was the youth pastor at the time, and said, hey man, I got a position coming available. It is a student ministry coordinator position. I think you would be perfect for it. No pressure either way. If you want to talk more, let me know. And I remember just sitting in my cubicle and looking at that message, and almost just rushed over me of like, I didn't even think that this was a possibility. I had never even put my mind here. But when it came, it was just one of those moments of like, I feel like I should take this seriously. And so I did, and interviewed and went through it and got all the way to the end. And it was what I believe one of those like God moments that would give me confidence to continue moving through, because the interview went great. I realized that I loved the church, and if I really did want to work for the church, and they offer me the job, and then they offer me what they're going to be paying me for this job. And I was like, I'm not the smartest guy. You've picked that up already, but I was like, this isn't enough, I'm married, I have a kid, I have another kid on the way. And I remember driving, after I got that offer, driving home, I was working in Fishers at the time, coming around 465, talking to God of like, God, I thought you were in this. I thought you were leading me here. I thought this is what you wanted me to do, and I'm willing to do it. But the numbers just don't make any sense. I'm in the middle of 465 going down the road, and my car shuts off. Goes black. It's not like it's like, oh, my car's about to die, I should do something. It's like I'm driving, and then everything on the dash just goes woof. Everything locks up. It takes everything. Power steering is gone. It takes everything I can to get it to the shoulder on 465 at rush hour. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, God, help me understand, because I'm trying to do this thing. And it felt like God, wasn't audible, but it just rushed over me of like, if you really believe I am who I say I am, and you believe that I'm the one calling you to this, you think a few $1,000s should be the thing that stops you from being able to do what I've called you to do? Because I'm the God that can stop your car in the middle of 465 and bring it to the side of the road safely. I think I can figure it out. And I remember in that moment just being like, okay, and car still in and drive. I put the car in park, I turn the car off, I turn the car back on, starts up, I drive home and say, babe, I don't know how it's going to work, but I think we need to take this job. And it did not go the way I thought. I thought by saying yes, God would be like, okay, you trusted me. Go check the mailbox. There's going to be some extra checks in there.
Right.
It's going to be great.
Right.
He did not. But what it did, looking back of, I grew up from an early age with that work ethic. If you want something, you go get it.
Yeah.
You provide for yourself. This was the first season in my life. And as a man, as a husband, as a father, I had to ask people for money. I had to ask my parents to loan me money. And it was like God used this season to like carve out the pride that was left in me.
Yeah.
There's still pride, but to carve out that pride, to carve out this thing that I can do this on my own, and really kind of drew me into this greater dependence on Him. Yeah, man.
That's cool. I never knew that. I knew that you had come to Traders. I knew that part, ended up working there and all that stuff. And so in that time from that to, how did you kind of move into, hey, I'm doing the student ministry coordinator role to like this role of, leading campuses that you've done, being this teaching pastor.
Yes.
I love, you're a great storyteller. I love your stories, but also love the meat that you give behind it. So how did that kind of develop, the passion towards that kind of grow?
Yeah, that was one of those things where I look back now of, I don't know another scenario where I come to know of that side of a gifting that I had of being able to speak, or was it something that God, supernaturally gave me after I committed I don't know. But honestly, as I was graduating from CCU, I take the job at Traders. One of the last classes I took in Bible college was a preaching class, and we only preached one message, and it was about like a 10-minute Devo. And I'd never done that before, so I'm thinking through it and I'm writing it. And this was the first time in my life where I realized that I could memorize things. And, I'm 23 years old. Obviously, I didn't really take school too seriously, but I'm writing it and I'm enjoying writing it. And I realized that I can take all this in and kind of do it. So I was like, oh, wow. And it wasn't amazing by any means, but I do that on like a Tuesday night. I start the job at Traders that next Sunday. We leave for our spring break trip to Florida for the youth ministry that week. On our way down there, the pastor was like, hey, we got these Devo times every morning. Would you be up for doing one of them? I was like, well, I'll be honest with you, man. I've only done one, and it was last week. And he was like, I'm sure that'll work. Just do that. And I was like, okay. And I did that. And then he was like, that didn't suck. And I was like, thanks, cool, man. You're really good at feedback. And then we get back from that trip and he was like, would you want to preach on a Sunday night for our youth ministry here? And I was like, wow. And I said yes to it. And he helped me, craft something and put it together. And it was moments of like, I love this, and glimpses of like, I don't think I'll ever do this again. I got up there and froze. And that time, like maybe you guys have experienced this where you freeze, but then sometimes you're like, I froze, but in my mind, it was so much longer than what it really was. Yes. Nobody really noticed. Yeah. This wasn't one of those times. This was like, and I know this because as I'm freezing and trying to find my words, I look out into the crowd and there's a sweet volunteer, Terry Taylor, if you know her. And she's just mouthing the words, it's okay. And I was like, it's not okay. But I worked through it, and we used to do two that night. And the second one was better than the first. And that was the beginning of it, man, of once I got off that stage. It was one of those things where I knew the more I did that, the more I just love those spaces where I know the only way this works is if I'm completely dependent on God, that I'm very aware that he gave me this, that I wouldn't even know about this if it wasn't for him. Yeah. And I just love the idea of being able to take something and to study it and to present it in a way that can make sense to people and they can have what I received so much later in life. And I've always been drawn to that idea of storytelling, and because growing up, I mean, obviously didn't grow up watching pastors, but the closest thing that I think we have to preachers are stand-up comedians. And I do have a long line of watching a lot of stand-up. And so I think there was parts of that were there that helped me early on with how to tell a story, timing, and being able to bridge those two worlds together of stand-up and preaching. Maybe that's sacrilegious. I don't know.
It gives me so much context for your preaching now. Yes, it's wonderful. Yes. So I want to talk about something that you said when you were asked to give that message. You said yes. And that's something that I've gotten to watch through your journey is just this journey of you saying yes, from going to student ministry to campus, like being a campus pastor, to coming back and being a teaching pastor, and now back in that campus pastor role. So talk about that idea of like just stepping into the yes. And how that has transformed the journey that you've been on for the last several years.
Yeah. One of the moments that I really think that idea of saying yes really solidified for me was there was a stint, a few years after I got into ministry where I was really trying to wrestle with church planting. Should I do this? Am I called to? I felt like God gave me this nudge to kind of to look at some things, and I was so afraid of missing it, of missing an opportunity that God was going to lay before me that I went all out, and I sold my house. I moved to a spot of town that I thought maybe we could plant this church, and I was going to do it bivocationally, and so started taking interviews for jobs, and I could not get a job. I could not get jobs that I'd had before. There should have been jobs that would have been easy, but it was like every door was shut. And
you mean Burger King?
They were not. They weren't taken. But I came to that spot of like, it was just like an epiphany of like, okay, I think I went from hearing God's voice to removing myself and really just trying to force my way into situations and make something happen. And I couldn't. It was like these doors would not open. And I remember praying to God of like, God, okay, I'm just going to say yes. I trust you. So God, if you bring me this opportunity, whatever is next, I'm trusting it's from you, and I will say yes. And it was like a week later. I'm at the Northwest campus, Traders Point, and they're about to launch the downtown campus, and the campus pastor at the time comes up to me and he's like, hey, this is going to sound crazy, but we're about to launch, and we have budgeted one position, but we really need two. We need a guest experience director, and we need a youth pastor. Could you do both? And I was like, God, is this what I didn't know this would be? But I remember just like, yes. And I said yes to it. I'd never done guest experience before. I'd never led youth ministry before. I'd taken different opportunities and led in more of like supportive roles, but said yes to these big opportunities, and then go into it, and I'm figuring it out, how to lead volunteers, how to lead teams, how to grow a ministry. And then, not even 6 months into the job, the campus pastor at the time takes a new job within the church, and I become the campus pastor of the downtown campus. And once again, it's just like God just kept opening up doors the more that I would just be willing to be faithful to what he had for me, not what I wanted or what I thought, but just clearly to what he was bringing to me.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think sometimes we maybe feel like, oh, this is the path for me, this is this thing. And we see it just through like, this is the singular paradigm that I can understand this. Yes. So for you, it was like, hey, church planting, do this, sell my house. Now there's still wonderful steps of obedience and faithfulness in that. But then there's this time, and I've done this in my life, where it's like, I try to, all right, God, you open this passageway, I got it from here. Like I'll arm wrestle it from here, no problem. And then what's great is those subtle reminders sometimes. And I think this is for everybody. I don't care what your industry is. You probably have this vision of yourself in the future in 3 to 5 years. I want to be this. And Tim Keller talks about the ideal future self.
Yes.
And I think that is something, especially in my mid to late 20s, that grabbed my heart more than it should have.
Yeah.
Was here's what I'm aspiring to be. And God is putting a stone in my shoe on some of these things. I'm paying attention to it. And now it's like, I got to make sure in my Midwestern mind that I manufacture and do my part and wrestle and knock down every door and all those things. And so I think there's that tension between, initiative and seeing opportunity and all that kind of stuff, and then manufacturing that. And so whether that's, you're working in a small business or a nonprofit or a church or a college student trying to figure your way, like sometimes there might be things right in front of you that you just say yes to, and then 6 months later you're the campus pastor. 5 months later you're the project manager. 5 months later you're an ops, right? Like whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And I love that story because I think there is that beauty of, hey, I heard this and it was true. And we're seeing years later that that was a step of obedience, but then also like where you were trying to grab it yourself too, man. Ryan, you've been doing like missional leadership for a while now, right? And talk about this, especially in lieu of the last few years. This, what does a replenishment cycle look like? How do you have these, daily, weekly, quarterly, yearly kind of rhythms that, have helped you stay on mission, have helped that to stay fresh, as well as maybe some of those warning signs, dashboard kind of things for you that you're like, you literally talked about your car turning off completely, right?
For sure.
But how do you, maybe see some of those things before they're coming? And I think our listeners, these are a lot of the things that we're having conversations with people about in the marketplace and church ministry and nonprofit world, where they're like, man, how do I model this and do this for myself and for my family, but also those around me that I have influence in? So just speak to that a little bit.
No, that's, I feel like that is one of the main tension points right now within my own life, and then people that I constantly sit down with. It's the speed of life, it's the pace, it's the weight that we try to carry. And I'm telling you, one of the best books I've read, it's on this, but just one of the best books I've read in the past, 3 to 5 years is The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer. And he really attacks this idea of we are not machines. As much as we want to pretend there's no consequences for running at this high speed, we're not. And he has this line in there that's really kind of opened my eyes to it, of how delicate and how much in need we are of things like rest and sleep. It's like to sustain, like, Lord willing, maybe we get to live 90 years here on earth. To sustain 90 years of life, you're going to have to roughly sleep for 30 of those years. And when you put that into perspective, it's like, oh, wow. And then so my journey over the past few years has really been, because, as I've gotten older, more kids, job, more responsibilities, more extracurriculars with kids and more things that they're connected with. And life gets so busy so fast. And I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that. And so I felt like some of that weight of, I don't want to live like this. I don't want to make it to the weekends. I don't want to be like dreaming of the week in the summer that I get to take off or anything like that, or be upset that Monday's coming and I didn't feel like I even got rested from the weekend. It's like, I don't want to live like that. So I really started looking at, once again, this was prompted by that book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. And this is going to sound silly, but I studied the Bible mostly for what it says, which is it's a book, so that's part of what you do. But he had this challenge in there of, don't just study what Jesus did, look at what he did. Look at his rhythms of his day. And then you begin to see of like, okay, he's ducking out in the morning. He's getting solitude. He's getting away by himself. And he's doing all these amazing things, but he had this balance and he had these rhythms. And so I just started to begin to practice a lot of those things. And for me, the biggest thing is daily getting up early in the morning. Like, especially for me, I love being able to get up, study God's word, to read it. I'm doing something right now which slows me down more than I've ever done. Our church is doing something new called micro groups. And Alex, I know you've heard a little bit about this, but it's studying the Bible in a way that I've never done over the past 12 years. It's one chapter a week.
Yeah.
And I'm like, at beginning, I'm like, we're not doing anything. We need to be reading. I can read the whole book in a week, but even reading that slowly and looking at things, you see how much you miss. And to sit before God in the morning before you do anything and just asking God to bring to the surface, what do you have for me today? Yeah. What do you want me to do today? I'm telling you, so much. You see people, you see what you need to say. Encouragement will come to you. A conversation will come to you. And it's just, it immediately sets the pace for what the rest of the day is going to look like. Yeah, that's huge. A Sabbath, which maybe some people know what this is. I never had any framework for it until the past few years. Like, I understood what it was, but to practice it. Yeah. And it's just this day of, you can work 6 days a week, but you get a day of rest. That's God's design for creation, is that you would work 6, but on that, you would get this day of rest. And that you would not just crawl into it, but because of the way that you're setting up your week from this day of rest, where you realize, this is not on me. This pressure, I get to hand this over. I get to feast, have some of my best meals, have an amazing time, and to realize I'm not God and He is. And even when I set this stuff down, the world keeps spinning. Everything keeps going. It's a great reminder. And so things like that. And then you mentioned the replenishment cycle. Yeah. This was something that for me, maybe it's because I don't want to generalize and say it's because I'm a man, but just me, I guess I can speak from that perspective. The idea of taking care of myself always seems selfish, especially when I have a family, when I have other people to take care of. It's like, me taking some time for myself means that I'm taking away time from someone else that I could be given to them. But I sat down with our executive pastor, and he walked me through it. And before I could even say it, he said, I guarantee this is what you're thinking right now. And I just want you to tell you, this has nothing to do with you being selfish. This is a stewardship issue. And what you're going to do here is you're going to find ways to replenish yourself, fill yourself up so that you can serve the people that you love even better. And so what you do is you just think about the things that fill you up, and then you do them. Some things are daily, some things are weekly, some things are quarterly, some things are yearly. But for me, I realized there were just little things like making coffee in the morning, not doing the Keurig situation, but doing time to roast the beans while I listen to worship music. And that process of seeing, it just does something. It settles me and calms me down. Shooting a basketball, that is something, just the dribbling noise. It's like therapeutic to me. To watch a movie, to go to the movies by myself, we even came up to there, which is an experience all of its own. But just little things to figure out, what is it? It's just that idea of, when the plane's going down, put your oxygen mask on first. But it becomes really hard, and without discipline and scheduling it in, it's not going to happen.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Pure enjoyment glorifies God.
Yes. There is nothing wrong with that.
Like something that's pure and enjoying it. Is that, like, God created that. He created that, those goodness, those things for us to experience. Not just so that we can go do that more for others, but even just being still, being filled, being
that's
present,
enough.
That's enough.
Yeah, so good. Ryan, as we wrap up this conversation, this has been so good. One of the things we love to do for our listeners is just share resources, books, podcasts that you're listening to, reading. I know you talked about The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. What's maybe another book or podcast that you could give to our listeners that's a great resource for them?
Besides the Shift the Gravity podcast, which I know season 2's coming up on that.
Season
it
2.
Is exciting. Just recorded the first episode.
Let's go.
Honestly, a book and just a message that has been wrecking me, and I think it goes hand in hand what we've been talking about here, is The Power of Place by Daniel Grothe, I believe is how you say his last name. But I first heard him on a podcast, and then I got the book. But the line in the podcast that really just hit me hard was, he's just talking about this idea of how transient our culture is, how fast it is. You move to the next best opportunity. You go from city to city. And he just talked about the power of place. And he said he just felt convicted of this message. And I'm paraphrasing it, but it was like, find your place, find your people, and try to die there. And that hit me in like, it's like, that's the ache that I've always had in my life of having a place and having a people that I could love so much and be so content with that's the ultimate place of content. Like I can die here.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's what I wanted. And he talks about just what happens when we shift our mindset from not just looking out to what's next, but to rooting ourselves in our neighborhoods, in our communities, really investing in those relationships. That's where life is. And there's things that happen when you commit to a place that won't happen when you're looking for the next thing.
Yeah.
And so that message has really just simplified my life of, you know, we built a house a door down from some of our best friends that my wife went to high school with, that I've been friends with for 10 years. And it's like, I want to be the best neighbors to them and everyone on my street. I want to love my church really, really well. And it helped me too, of wondering, you know, I've been here my whole life. Should I have left? Should I have went somewhere?
Yeah.
Is there something else out there? And this gave me the thing of like, no, the relational capital you have is here. Leverage everything you got. You are so rooted here. Go deeper. And it's just kind of opened me up, man.
That's so good. And we will be sure to link that book, the podcast you reference, into the show notes so you can grab those easily.
Ryan, how can people find you and get involved with some of the things you're doing?
Yeah, I'd say the best place would be just the Traders Point website, tpcc.org. A lot of the messages that I do are on there. And whether it's my message or any of the people that preach there, there's just I feel like we're in a great season right now where God's leading out in some practical stuff. Personally, Instagram would probably be the only spot that I'm pretty active on. And it's just Ryan Bramlett, Ryan.Bramlett there. But I'm trying to figure out that space right now of how do I want to use it and how can I leverage that too.
That's cool, man.
That's good.
Well, we want to say thank you to Ryan. Thanks, man. This is so good. It's nourishing for me, even just sitting here right now. And we want to say thanks to all of you for tuning in to this episode of the 4 Everyday Leaders podcast. We hope that it helps you lead in the everyday spaces and moments of your life.
Yeah, and we would love for you to continue to join us on this journey of the 4 Everyday Leaders podcast, brought to you by Wayfinders. You can subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Anchor, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Ryan, dude, thanks so much. This was so encouraging, so much gold in that conversation, and I really appreciate you jumping in.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.